If you are responsible with your money and you keep your expenses low and your income high, and yet you still can't get ahead with your money, today I want to talk to you about a very important concept called budgeting. Obviously, you're probably pretty good at it at this point, but really, what I want you to think about with budgeting is how to increase your cash flow because that is actually what's going to allow you to get to financial freedom. So today's topic is rethink your budget. My name is Jordan. I am with Couples Create Cash Flow, where we try to help couples to get to financial freedom as fast as possible by maximizing their cash flow to pay off debts and invest in the future. So today we are looking at how to get to financial freedom. Why do we budget? This is the question we're going to start with because a lot of us are told from the very beginning when we start our financial education with personal finance classes or looking over spreadsheets with our parents, what we are told we need to budget our money. Okay, so why do we budget in the first place? The problem is the problem is we don't like to budget. Nobody likes looking backwards at how they spent their money and feel guilty about what you spent your money on because a lot of times we come across situations where we just want to say yes instead of saying no. We have friends ask us to do something fun and we're like, yeah, let's do it. And then later on, we look back and say, ooh, that actually cost more money than I expected it to. And so we really just don't like cutting back on things typically. Um, Once we've gotten good at budgeting, sometimes it gets easier to say no to things because you've kind of focused in better on what your important spending habits should look like. However, at the very beginning, we don't really like it. It also can seem like we are restricting ourselves instead of becoming more free when we budget. And that is oftentimes the opposite of our goal. We want to become financially free, and yet we're being told by ourselves and by other people, no, don't spend money on that. So, how do we get to the point where our budget is actually something that is a tool that we enjoy using instead of something that we avoid at all costs? I work as a couples therapist, and a lot of times the budget is the main thing that people struggle with. They have a hard time agreeing on what they should spend money on and what they shouldn't. In fact, a lot of times one of the partners is the one that spends the money and the other one is the one that makes the money. And you can oftentimes see how different spending habits and different values on what is the money spent on can actually result in some conflict between people where you have a free spirit that spends money all the time and one that's more of a finance nerd or a spreadsheet nerd that says no, 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 we need to cut our spending down as much as possible. And so those two positions oftentimes collide. And if you have a situation in your relationship where it just doesn't, you don't have good communication, it can be really challenging, and that this topic can really lead to a lot of conflict. So we're going to talk about it in depth today. And my solution to this question is really that the purpose of budgeting is to create cash flow. You may have thought that the purpose of budgeting was to not spend too much money. And actually, that is creating cash flow because cash flow is your income minus your expenses. So when you create a scenario where you make more money than you spend, that is cash flow. All right. So today we're talking about the 5 stages of cash flow in your personal finances. This will be a tool for you to think about where are you at on your financial journey? Because as you move through these different stages, your goals are going to look different. So we need to recognize what stage are you in before you know how to budget. The whole purpose of budgeting is to create cash flow, but in each stage, you're going to have a task that you're trying to accomplish. So stage 1, actually, sorry, stage 0. Stage 0, you have negative cash flow. This is where you actually spend more than your income. So your cash flow is negative. This would mean you need to tap into savings or spend money on a credit card to make ends meet each month. Now, there are times when this has to happen. Like, let's say you lose a job, or you're starting a business, or something has changed in your life temporarily that creates a higher amount of expenses or a lower amount of income. However, in general, it's pretty hard to continue living at this stage zero for very long without going to collections or going bankrupt. So we call this stage zero because hopefully you're not here. Hopefully you've moved up a notch. But if you are, your main goal at this stage is to get your income and your expenses to match up. So there's two different ways to do that. You can increase your income or decrease your expenses. Fair enough. A lot of times it's easier to cut an expense than to increase your income, but maybe not. Maybe you could actually go out and get a part-time job or a side hustle and make some more money. Stage one. This is where you get to that point where your cash flow is positive. When your income's higher than your spending, you have positive cash flow. Even if it's only $1, you have positive cash flow. Now, when that happens every once in a while, or maybe 1 month out of 5 or 6, it can be really hard to still feel like this is an advancement in your finances. But whenever you can get your finances to match up, your income and your expenses to match up so that you have a little bit extra, that is a great step in the right direction. That's when you really get the ball moving towards financial freedom. The next stage is stage 2, where your cash flow starts to target the debt that you have. Now, this has been popularized by Dave Ramsey using the debt snowball method, where you list all of the debts you have, all of the interest rates and the balances, and you figure out which one's got the lowest balance. You start directing your cash flow towards that lowest balance so that you can start eliminating monthly payments. As you eliminate the monthly payments, what ends up happening is you create more money each month, more cash flow to then continually direct at the next debt. And so as you go in order, you don't change the amount of money you spend towards your debt repayment. You actually keep that same budget item in your budget. However, instead of sending it to multiple places, you start to consolidate it down and really target the balances of those loans that you still have left. Now, this works really well because you aren't necessarily having to come up with extra money. As long as your budget produces a cash flow every month, then you can use that cash flow and the money that you free up by paying debts off to continually pay down your total amount of debt to where you have a very manageable debt repayment in your budget. Now, the other way to do this is called debt avalanche. And that's where you look at your interest rates and you figure out which one am I really paying the most interest on, and focus in on how do you get those top interest rate amounts down. This is actually a method that could be really helpful. But a lot of times the reason why people land on the debt snowball instead of the avalanche is because they need some wins. When you have a mentality of, I just paid something off, it motivates you to move into the next level. So I would say debt snowball is probably more emotionally stimulating, but you may end up with a situation where you're lucky enough that your largest interest rate is also your smallest balance. And so then it maybe isn't that big of a deal. You know, invariably what ends up happening for most people is they pay down all of their debts until they're left with their mortgage. The mortgage is really the one that takes quite a while to pay off. So even Dave Ramsey would say, don't try to pay your mortgage off before you move to the next phases of life. You need to start thinking about other things when you have just the house to pay off. So stage 3, you have to start thinking about purchasing assets. Now, the assets that you purchase have to produce a monthly, quarterly, or annual cash flow without selling the asset. And that is called passive income. What a lot of people do not think about when they're buying their investments is whether or not that investment will pay them back in a regular manner. So, for example, let's say you went out and bought some shares of Tesla, which at this moment in time are not paying dividends. you would end up with an investment into a stock purchase, which is a tiny, tiny portion of the big company. However, you would not be sharing in a distribution from that asset. You would only just be playing that would go up in value instead of down. And because it doesn't pay out a dividend, you're not really increasing the quantity of shares that you own. You are only ever holding the amount of shares you purchased. The shares have an increasing amount or decreasing amount of value, but they don't produce a regularly occurring income, that cash flow. This is one of the main distinctions between how Dave Ramsey tells you to invest and how most of the rich in this country decide to invest. And that's because the asset definition needs to be very clear. So I'm using the definition based on the definition given by Robert Kiyosaki in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where he talks about an asset has to put money into your pocket, whereas a liability takes money out of your pocket. There are things that can be purchased that are meant to hold value, such as cryptocurrencies and gold, and maybe even classic cars and art and things like that, that will continue to have a value no matter what happens in the market. However, those do not produce a cash flow. And one of the main reasons that a lot of people struggle with financial freedom and not getting there is because the money they have left over after paying their bills typically does not go towards something that will produce a cash flow. The reason why it's important that you buy assets that bring in more money is because as you buy more and more assets that bring in more and more cash flow, you start compounding how much free cash you have each month. As you do that, you can buy bigger and better assets. So for example, you may have to start by just buying some dividend stocks that pay out a dividend on a regular basis. Maybe that's where you start, and you just hold on to those dividend assets, those stocks, and you allow the payments of the dividends to buy more shares of that stock, which is called the dividend reinvestment plan, which is called the DRIP method, which in most brokerage accounts is something you can turn on or off for each member of your portfolio that you purchase. So my suggestion would be always look at how much you are going to get in cash flow when you buy an asset. Some assets do a much better job at this than others. If you think about rental real estate, people pay a monthly amount to their landlord in order to stay at that property. And so a monthly flow of cash is really nice. There are other things that only pay out quarterly or annually. So you have to think about, when do those flows come back to the investor? Because really the idea would be, how can you buy something that actually pays you back the equity that you have put in, so that at some point you are living off of a cash flow from an investment that you made and already recouped. So if I buy a rental property and the initial investment I put into it is returned to me with a cash flow over the course of 5-7 years, then as long as I'm holding it long term, I actually retain the ability to get those cash flows indefinitely until I sell, which really gives me not just a position in a net worth setting where my net worth has increased, but I also am empowered every month to have money to pay my expenses. When you get the money to pay your expenses every month, it's a different way of looking at planning for the future. If you're just investing for retirement, then what ends up happening is you're putting all this money into mutual funds, retirement funds, and they are sitting in an account waiting for you to turn 59 and a half, at which point you could start to withdraw them. But the problem is they are not really giving you any monthly cash as you wait. Or even once you get to that point where you could withdraw it, you cannot count on your monthly bills being paid by a balance in a 401k account, for example. What you have to do is divest that money, pull the money out in order to live off of that and cover your expenses, which means the amount of money you have invested starts to decrease, which means the amount of interest you can earn starts to decrease. And the more you do that, the less financial stability that you have. And so, really, this stage is really important for most people. This is the stage where you have to decide, are you investing your money towards cash flow creating assets, or are you investing your money towards a stockpile of money so that one day, someday, you can start pulling money from the interest earned on those dollars to live off of? Now, there is something called the 4% rule that's been popularized. And what that says is that as long as you have a nest egg large enough that 4% of your nest egg can be taken out each year to cover your annual expenses without taking from the principal of your investment, then you should be able to indefinitely pull out what you need to live off of in order to continue living and not pulling from your principal. So the idea would be, let's say 7% of your large nest egg, or your nest egg, grows by 7% each year. 3% is the inflation rate, which obviously we're in 2022. We've seen quite a different inflation rate this year. But in general, if we're saying like a 3% inflation rate, that leaves about 4% that you can pull out. And you're basically just pulling out the earnings on your investment instead of pulling out the principal. So that is a way to think about it, but it's really, really risky, in my opinion, because you are waiting for a day to start pulling those funds out, but you don't know what the market's going to be doing at that point. Also, when you pull those funds out, now all of a sudden you're being taxed, taxable income at your normal rate, and taxes are going to just continue going up most likely. So having a taxable event when you pull those monies out, and then also having this concept of, if it's been growing, you might get taxed on the growth if it's set up as a 401k. So really, in my opinion, retirement funds are not as reliable as people seem to think they are. You need to have some other ways to really know how much money you make per month and really improve how well your investments pay you so that each month your expenses can be covered. Let's say you have enough rental properties that each one creates some cash flow for you. Let's just say you have a need to make $10,000 a month. I mean, that's kind of a lot, but $10,000 a month, and you have a few rental properties that each provide you with $200 a month. Well, that would take a while to get there, wouldn't it? Maybe you have an apartment building with 24 units, and each unit provides you with $200 a month. You start to be able to see how if you reduce your spending, you could actually make it easier to pay your monthly bills through the cash flow from your assets, which really, this is stage 4, when the income from your job is optional because the income from your assets covers your monthly expenses. So that if you want to continue working, you can, but in all, likelihood, you'll probably scale back because you don't have to. And this just gives you plenty of options in your lifestyle. You could travel, you have more family time, you could live a luxurious lifestyle. Really, the thing I see people struggling with the most in their retirement planning and their budgeting is really that in order to make it work, they're really focusing in on being as tight on their spending as possible, thinking that one day, oh, I'll be in retirement, be able to travel, see the world. But that's kind of assuming that in retirement, your lifestyle is going to be higher or more expensive than it is right now. And it's kind of hard to plan your retirement on what you may or may not spend in the future. So, in my opinion, it feels like it should be more likely that your retirement plan will work if you really choose a lifestyle that's sustainable. So, if you are planning on traveling, why not incorporate traveling into your lifestyle right now and build an income stream and an expense ratio between your income and your expenses that matches up with the values that you have and the lifestyle that you want to live. All right, now we're in the stage where we can rethink our budget. Here's what I'm going to say. There is a link in the description below that will bring you to a quick free guide that I created that'll help you to get started in this area. All I ask is that you go to the link, give me your email address so that I can continue to connect with you and give you more free guides and more updates on content. And I'd be happy to send that guide to you free of charge. So thank you for watching. Be sure to add any questions you might have in the description or the comment section below. And until next time, stay on the right path and good luck.